Hi, this is Brian Aiello, and welcome to Origins, Stories on Creativity. This is our second episode, and today we're going to be talking with Jason Abbott. If this is your first time listening, thanks for joining us. Remember, the podcast is produced every Tuesday and Thursday for your enjoyment. The show notes can be found on brianaiello.com. Come back often. Feel free to add the podcast to iTunes. It's on Stitcher as well. You could follow me on Twitter at Bryaiello. That's Bryaiello. Facebook, all the other good things are going to be in the links in the note, as well as Jason Abbott's contact information as well. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to Origins, Stories on Creativity. You are my number 2 guest of all time, Mr. Jason Abbott, correct?
That is me.
Very excited.
Happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. So let's talk a little bit about you. You're from Maine.
Yes.
You are the son of a lobsterman.
Yes, I am.
Did you spend your childhood on board a boat doing the deed?
I spent my childhood in a number of different towns in Maine, popping around. I was born in Boothbay Harbor. The hospital only about 20, 30 feet from the water. My dad still does lobstering even today. He's in his 70s, bless him, and still going strong out on the water.
Where's did you say Booth Bay?
Boothbay Harbor. It's a place. It's a little town past Wiscasset, Maine. It's on the southern coast, getting towards the mid coast area, over here on the Atlantic, and that was my hometown. It's a little peninsula. It was right past Wiscasset, where the old Maine Yankee nuclear power plant used to be, and the evacuation plans called for us in case of emergency to go right past the nuclear power plant while it was melting down.
Perfect.
So
always, that's going to be fantastic for you guys.
Oh yeah,
you'll be able to witness the whole thing. I mean, life is about experiences, and if that one was going to be your last one, it's going to be a nice one.
Yeah, we always kind of hoped Dad would be around. We could get on the boat and maybe outrun it, but fortunately, that never happened. Though there was the day that the sirens went off by accident, and oh boy, well, that was scary. And also they blared good old World War II level sirens. And they just kind of got stuck on for a couple of hours.
A couple hours, my God.
A couple of hours before they could get the system down there. So, and that was, of course, in the 80s. You know, I was an 80s kid, so being about 9-10 years old at the time, that kind of got on our nerves because we were all thinking about World War III and the Russians.
On your nerves. That's that's a great way to put
it. So yeah, Maine's largest city, Portland, is about an hour away. It's about an hour's drive from Portland, which is on the southern coast of Maine.
Oh, okay. So are you south or north of Portland?
When Boothbay Harbor is northeast.
Okay.
The way the Maine coast goes, getting up to the little peninsula that juts about, I think, 15-20 miles out into the sea. So
I've only been to Maine one time. It was beautiful. I spent my honeymoon, quote unquote, there.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say it was Portola, but that might be completely wrong.
Portola. Are you sure it wasn't Portland?
No, it wasn't Portland.
Okay.
It was It was on the north shore of the Atlantic. It was beautiful. I loved it.
I'll have to look up on that one. It's not ringing a bell. Up a little further, Boothbay Harbor is basically like a little touristy kind of town. Very beautiful place out on the peninsula. It's going through a lot of changes. But when I was growing up there, it was a stark contrast between the population there would go from about 5,000 folks to about 20,000 folks in the summer, when we'd have a big influx of tourist industry. And everything's very much geared around that. And other than that, the local residents that were there year round, very small. Like my high school had a total attendance of about 200 kids. So very
Wow,
small high
that's
school.
freshmen through seniors.
Yes, that. I've known people who have just their single class has that many kids, if not a lot
Yeah,
more. I
that was
mean,
my
like,
high school growing up. Yep.
yeah. So my graduating class was, I think 26, 24.
That's
So
easy. It felt like forever. Sat in that auditorium watching people climb up on stage. So this is never going to be over with. You know what?
yeah,
It's Camden, actually, the place I
Camden,
went. We camped up there. What is that?
Mount
Megan.
Camden.
Yeah.
Yep, Mount Camden. I've been up on top. There's a beautiful view. It's unusual because it's so close to the water. You
Hmm.
can just look right out over the ocean.
It's got that World War I memorial right on top.
Yep, the little
It's a
yep, looks
lighthouse.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, it
It,
looks like an old medieval tower up there almost.
exactly.
Yeah,
Ate some wild blueberries. Beautiful.
mhm.
This is back when they were giving away lobsters, or at least we thought. We drove all the way up there and paid normal price. Like, man, this is not fair. The news told us that you had extra. Do you like lobster, or is this something that you've basically eaten too much of in your life?
Well, I'll tell you, Brian. When it comes to lobster, you ever seen Forrest Gump where Bubba Gump's talking about
The
shrimp?
shrimp, yeah.
That's pretty much me with lobster. I've had, regular old lobster. I've had boiled, fried lobster, lobster flambe, lobster a la mode,
Have you ever
lobster
had a blue
stew.
lobster?
Those are rare to
Yeah, that's
catch.
what I
If
hear.
any lobsterman that catches one of those in their traps immediately goes around and sells them and makes usually several grand. They're quite rare.
Have you
Um,
ever tried? I mean, are they different as far as like a culinary choice, or are they?
I've never had one. The only
You've never
folks
had
that can
one.
afford to eat a blue lobster that's been caught, they're so rare that they generally don't cook them unless like you're Donald Trump,
Yeah.
and you can plunk down like a ton of money. Usually, what they end up doing with a blue lobster is they give them they either donate or they sell them. Some folks are nice enough to donate them to an aquarium, but others will sell them. Because it's pretty marginal. Depending any kind of living that you make off of the sea
Yeah.
can have its ups and downs. So a lot of folks will generally sell them and make a little bit extra to put a new layer of paint on the boat or get some new traps.
Hmm.
So no, I've
Yeah.
never had lobster, but I don't. I've just had it so much that as a kid that it's not so special to me. So,
Hmm.
I'll have it when I go and hang out with my dad on 4th of July. We'll boil up some lobster and we'll have some in a cookout with some corn on the cob, and that'll do me just fine. I'll be good for a year.
There you go. I wouldn't trust Donald Trump with blue lobster anyway. I hear his palate's not
I have some. I have
not too
some.
good.
Yeah, I have some high school friends which now make a living on the water like that, is doing
Okay.
lobster. And
That's
uh,
interesting. I mean, I grew up in Florida on the Gulf,
mhm.
and shrimping was a huge industry around me as a child, but it's gone now.
Yeah,
It's
it's
gone.
it's the way the things have changed. I mean, like things have been overfished, and there's all the competition internationally over there. Like Maine's having problems with its lobsters in regards to competition out of Canada, and
Mm.
then other competition. Like a lot of our lobster actually gets shipped overseas, even to places like Japan. Um, where they consider it a delicacy to pull that in. And then like we used to have sea urchins. When I was a kid growing up, you'd find sea urchins. I'd walk around on the coast all the time. Spiky little sea urchins. Everywhere.
Hmm.
Back in the 90s, it turns out that these sea urchins over in Japan are a very expensive delicacy, to the point when they had completely been wiped out over there. And they came, and a bunch of back in the 90s, divers were diving down and collecting all the sea urchins and completely wiped them. You can hardly find them these days around here. So it's probably kind of similar to the overfishing of shrimp and
But you
stuff
know what
like
it
that.
is? It's actually the shrimp that's coming out of Asia and the farms. That's
Hmm.
what's put out the real shrimpers, put them out of business anyway.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate. I mean, is that one of the reasons? Are you an actual engineer, or are you
No, no, no. I'm just a writer.
you're just a writer? Okay. Well, there's
Just
nothing
I
wrong with that.
I went with the I like to think of that I'm an Imagineer.
I read
As
that on your blog. I thought that
Yeah.
was really, really clever the way that was worded. That was really nice.
It's a term that came
Um,
from Walt Disney, actually. I didn't know that at the time I was picking the name, but I kind of like it where, you're using your imagination to imagine up things. And so
Yeah,
there we go.
Imagineers, absolutely. Absolutely. So how long have you been doing the writing thing?
Uh, I've I've been coming up with stories and things since I was a little kid. As soon
Uh-huh.
as I could start talking, any of my teachers from way back when I was young in school would tell you I had the gift of gab, which my science teacher, Mr. Smith, was happy to tell the entire class. Um, I, I I got into writing and knew that I had a talent for it. Probably right around fifth grade is where I noticed that I could really excel on that. But I had I kind of got stuck. Like a lot of writers, I struggled with, um, you know, the fear of sharing my ideas and the social anxiety about doing that. So I got into as I like to tell people, the world building dungeon, which is, for fantasy authors, that's a very common pitfall. I
Yeah,
think
it
you might
is. Yeah, I see
agree.
it all the time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you probably experienced it, where you begin to think of ideas and you get really into the story and the world that you're trying to build. And so you start putting in notes. And for me in particular, I kind of cut my teeth as a kid. I grew up, being exposed to things like Dungeons and Dragons, and I got into
Absolutely, yeah.
role-playing games. And so that kind of served as a gateway for me to begin to experience and find books, like getting into the Robert E. Howard and Elsbrag de Camp
Conan.
with the Conan stories,
Yeah.
and all of Lovecraft, and so many things branching off of that to pull
Well, who
into the
got you into that? Because that's some old school fantasy stuff right there.
my
Is that a
mom.
kid going to the light? Your mom did.
My mom, I was too, well, I kind of had some passing experience through D&D, but D&D tends to go more for the epic fantasy. There's a lot more inspiration going in there in D&D when it comes to Tolkien, and that kind of epic fantasy with elves and dwarves and human races and all of those other things.
There's nothing
Uh,
wrong with that stuff.
Oh, nothing all, nothing all. But oddly enough, I can thank my mom, because I was sick in my very early teens, and I mean, I wasn't in a hospital or anything. I just had the flu, and she went down to the store and she picked up a great big omnibus of the Conan the Barbarian stories. I think it was like 6 books all wrapped into one. You know how they had there
Mhm.
were like 27 different books. There's probably even more now that were just collected short stories. And so I got that omnibus and I started sitting down and reading that, and that's where I got into the Conan stories, and
And it
that.
just went from there because he
It,
was actually, that author was friends with Lovecraft.
yep, and that's
Weren't they
how I
like the
got.
but yeah.
They never met in person, the Howards, and they had this remarkable correspondence and friendship via letters. And those
Hmm.
collected letters are actually available, and they're fantastic to read. They were very different men, but it's through reading about the Conan stories, because Howard actually borrowed some elements from HP and put them into his stories. Like a lot of sometimes the gods and stuff are kind of weird in that tradition, that Lovecraftian tradition. So that piqued my interest, and I went to the library and read some Lovecraft. I didn't really get into Lovecraft until my later years. He's
Hmm.
a bit harder to get into. His language is kind of
The way he
difficult.
frames a story too is very interesting. Well, very hard to break into.
Yeah, it's
I,
very cerebral.
he's also he's selfless as far as his writing is concerned. He shares with everybody. It
Oh
seems like
yeah.
if you read one of his anthologies, it might have 2 book or stories by him and 4 by other authors. Oops, did I lose you? Hello.
Hey, I'm back. Something happened and I got knocked off.
Hey. I might have hung up on you. I have no clue. I'm just sitting here pacing back and forth. Uh,
Yeah,
I was just saying how
do go on.
Lovecraft is oh no, am I doing it again?
No, you're good.
Oh, okay. I got to stop playing with the buttons on my phone. What was I going to say? Lovecraft is very selfless as far as his stories are concerned. It seems like he shares with everybody.
Yeah, he's almost the inventor of like a shared universe.
I love
I
that there are games now coming out.
Oh
There are
yeah, yeah.
role-playing games and board games, that this whole mythology is actually being explored by countless people.
Well, the Call of Cthulhu is actually a game that I think got started in the very late 70s, if you want to go into RPG territory, and they fleshed out
Sure.
and categorized so much. They kind of created these wonderful collections of all the monsters. And did I just lose you again?
No, 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 you're still here. I don't know
Okay,
what's
cool.
happening.
Okay. Yeah. The app, I'm getting messages about the app. But anyways, yeah, Call of Cthulhu, the role-playing games, and this happened with Star Wars too when they made the RPG for Star Wars. The RPGs collect information in kind of an encyclopedic kind of a way that
Mhm.
then later authors can look back and find a coherent listing of a lot of stuff on there. It was completely unintended because in the way that RPGs are done, you just, okay, so it's a star spawn of Cthulhu. So how dangerous is this? How much is it going to make it go insane? Where like they created this catalog which really didn't exist. But Lovecraft was remarkable in that he had these shared universes that people could. He had absolutely no problem with people borrowing his ideas or whatnot, and I think that's greatly contributed to the influence that he's had on horror fiction and to an extent fantasy as well, as those
Mhm.
kind of genres can cross over.
Do you consider yourself more of a fantasy author?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really do a lot that's straight horror. I do have ideas that can tinge over there, and I don't write, and I also will write about things that on occasion have like a horror basis. Like I've written about vampires in my story Angel, short story I put out there. But and it has some horror aspects in there. But I think anybody looking for like a straight Stephen King style, horror, and it's certainly not cosmic horror like what Lovecraft would do.
Mhm.
That's just not generally my thing. If I write about monsters, I'm usually taking a look that a more action adventure kind of a sense, or I'm using the monsters as metaphor.
Mhm.
Putting in kind of a brooding horror isn't something that I generally go for.
But the fantasy aspects, what do you enjoy writing about that? You obviously broke out of your dungeon?
Yeah, to get back on that, yeah, the world building dungeon, right about when I got into high school, I got really into RPGs, and so instead of getting focused in on writing so much, I was making games, and I was kind of isolated, as I've already mentioned. Boothby Harbor was kind of a small place.
Hmm.
There really weren't a lot of geeky role players there, and when I graduated high school, I didn't really move on to college. I had a rather disastrous idea that I was going to get into cinematography and because I love films and movies.
Hmm.
So I ended up trying to go and get into film and cinematography, and found out that apps, and like I had done independent study in my high school for about 3 years, gearing myself up to do that. And within the first couple weeks of college, discovered that totally was not something that I wanted to do. Something and that feeling isn't uncommon with a lot of people that go to college. You find
Hmm.
you're at high school, you really don't know who you are yet. You're still learning and feeling your way through, and then you get to college and you find out, you go, wow, like I totally don't want to do this. And for me, it was because I had entertained an illusion that that being a director like, say, Steven Spielberg
Hmm.
was like when you hear like a Steven Spielberg film, people on the outside get the feeling that, oh, he sits down and he makes this wonderful craft. And the reality is that what a director does with a motion picture is that they're finding a team of people to create a coherent vision that fits with what they want to create. And so they're really not like in control. Like their percentage of what they've actually contributed to making when you see the finished product on the screen is very small. I mean, like, like you have camera operators and editors and special effects guys and artists, and it's all distributed. So like they're kind of overseeing this team to coalesce them. And if they're successful at their craft, to have like a film which has elements and commonalities with other pieces of art that they've created, in
Well, it
addition
totally
to
makes
being good.
sense that
Yeah.
you would end up being an author as opposed to, contributing to a part of a team because you want to own your own world. You want to own your own
Exactly.
creation. Yeah.
Yeah, you hit it right on the nose. So that fundamentally, being someone who likes to world build and come up with ideas, I wanted to have more control over what I wanted to do. But still, I had put 3 years of my teen years, building myself up for this, and it felt like a real big failure. And so I came home from that, and when I came back, I kind of meandered around and got into being a bit of a hermit, and I got working on my worlds and world building, and I got trapped in that dungeon for about 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I always working on the worlds, always trying to make them a little bit more fleshed out, a little bit better. And then
Hmm.
I would work so hard on something, and then I would put it aside and I would work on some other idea. So I was always thinking and always working on ideas. But as far as like actually sitting down and writing them, that was very, very sporadic. I mean, and so I would work on that and send that over. And after 20 years and getting married and divorced and then remarried, and after all of that, in 2013, I made a new friend, and she was working really hard to try to get into writing on her own. And I saw in her struggles what she was trying to do and get herself the same kind of moving between subject and not
Hmm.
really wanting to share their work. And so we were kind of teaming up on a project, which has kind of become a back burner thing now. But um, seeing her struggles, and at that point in my life, my mom had just passed away, and that kind of made me really reassess my life and what am I really doing here? Because yeah, I've been going between job to job, and I wasn't really satisfied in any kind of job that I was doing. And there are other factors that contributed to me thinking, like I was in a relationship with my ex-wife and she wasn't very supportive of my creative side at all, and it wasn't a good relationship. And when I met my new wife, when I met Kim, and we got married, she was an extremely supportive person who's very geeky and a big reader, and became my absolute number one cheerleader. And
Oh, that's fantastic.
you totally need, they say that, behind every, if you look at a person who's successful, they usually have a partner that is supporting them, and that is a supportful person that gives them inspiration. And Kim absolutely is that.
Oh, that's
So,
fantastic.
like that kind of was like a big turnaround. And probably things might have kicked off a little bit sooner, but my mom was very ill and was of failing health, and we were struggling with finances and other things. But when mom passed away, and I finally had some time to kind of think and process, I said, I met my friend Jess, and she was working on, at the time, trying to write her own book and stuff. And she had been the same way. She had been trapped in that world building dungeon where she just was creating and making notes continuously. And I said, I gotta just start writing.
Well, let me ask you this: as far
Yeah.
as the world building dungeons are concerned, do you think
Mhm.
that it has to impact your writing in a positive way?
Oh yeah,
Even
yeah.
today, I mean, it's not a waste as far as the depth that you went. And are you still writing in that world? I mean, basically, that's two questions. Do you think it impacts your writing in a positive way? And we'll handle that. We'll go
Okay.
on from there.
Does it impact it? It absolutely, to think out a coherent built world is important, but I think the vast majority of folks use it as an excuse not to write. um, that you can think out every little detail about this world, but world building and storytelling are different sides of the coin. If you focus too much on the world building, you'll never write, because you're building a whole world, and you can just continue to create this for an entire lifetime and never tell a story. And you know what? That's cool if that's what you want to do. But if what you want to do is tell a story, you have to you have to hone your craft and become good at telling a story. And that was my problem, in that I would envision a whole world, and I would try to once I had the whole world envisioned, or at least if I ever got to that point,
If you ever got to that,
which usually doesn't happen, because usually the
did you?
plot.
Do you think that you actually got to that point? Do you think you got created a world that was full
Never.
and Yeah. And
Never.
how are you going to do that?
Never. No, I never got to that point. Because like, where are you going to stop? I mean, like you get, I would get to a point that I'm plotting out like where cities are and maps and ecology and geology and then history and then what's going on in the present. And then I started like to tack story on top of that. And you're kind of putting the cart before the horse when you're doing
Hmm.
that. First, you have to figure out the story that you want to tell.
Hmm.
Then you build the world around it.
Hmm.
So all of that experience that I have had before in those worlds just kind of gives me some pre-made chunks that I can say, oh, okay, well, I kind of want to do this to start. Well, I had this world, I had this idea in this chunk of world building. I'll grab that, and
Hmm.
then I'll take this other idea and I'll grab that, and I'll kind of use these as blueprints, and then I'll build things. But I like to tell people when they're writing that they're for a story, it's like you're building a set. People get like we see things that have been handed down to us like Tolkien and the professor's worlds that he's given to us in Middle Earth, and we see such a thoroughly developed background. Like we're only seeing the very tippy top of the iceberg when we're reading the Lord of the Rings. But the reason for that is that he was totally into building his worlds and
Tremendously
construct
so.
tremendously. He spent his entire, like, we're talking a lifetime. And not only that,
Dude
he
wrote
was,
languages.
yeah, he made over 30 different languages that he just made for fun. But I mean, he was a professor of languages, and I guess that's something that a professor of languages can do for fun. And he was a medieval historian and a number of other aspects on there. And he took all of this and drew this with great passion and to create his world. The books were just kind of like he wanted to make a way to tie all of these languages he invented together, and thus started his world building for Middle Earth. So I think a lot of people look at that massive amount of world building and say, well, if I want to be like Tolkien, I have to like build worlds as he did. And like, especially when it comes to constructing languages to use in one's books. And I look people dead in the eye and I say, you know what? I'm not Professor Tolkien. I'm not, I didn't, I'm not a professor of languages. I don't know the first thing about constructing, Elven phonetics and all this other stuff. So I'm just gonna tell a story.
Hmm.
And that was my big problem to get to the second question that you had that
Are you
where
still working in that world?
yeah, I am in aspects in my broader fantasy world that I have of Burris. I have actually stuff from 20 years ago that I worked out in regards to the gods and maybe a couple of other concepts that I grabbed with some of the races. So there's little bits and chunks, but I had come up with a large consistent world on that. And for the most part, nah, I haven't touched it. I came up with Burris when I was just said, you know what, I'm going to write some uh, kind of a classic, quote unquote, classic fantasy type world, with kind of maybe an epic fantasy feel that I could place my short stories in.
Hmm.
And by having all of these fantasy short stories and putting them into a consistent world, I'm kind of building a mythos and a background on that. Um, but when I did the world building for that, it was a scrap of paper where I jotted out 5 different kingdoms in a very rough, like literally back of an envelope sketch. And then I did about maybe a 5-page essay to start where I just kind of got, and it was just like slapping down like some very basic facts about all of the different kingdoms involved with the continent of Burris. And over the last few years, those have grown a little bit but they've grown primarily as I write stories based in the setting. Like
Hmm.
I just start growing things when like I write a story. Like I'm like, oh, okay, well I have a general idea of the map, and I'm like, okay, well I'm going to put this down here. I want this type of a climate in a setting. And I'm like, oh, okay, this would work. And then I slap it down into there. And then that little part of the map grows a little bit more detailed, and so on and so forth. I've made places completely up, and just put it on there because I believe that the world is a set.
Hmm.
And when we see these great big world books, like G.R.R. Martin's A Song of Fire and Ice. Like when you're looking at like that's like the end product of him working and
Yes.
creating all of these things. He didn't, I'm pretty sure that the way that he writes, he didn't start with like a very thorough geographical, setting. And unless he had sat down and worked on his stories, which he did, and then they became popular and talked about, that is when people are actually really interested in the geography or like a world book of something, when they want to sit down and read it. When you've been thoroughly successful, that's when like an atlas of a fantasy world is something that people might want to take a look at. And I think a lot of fantasy writers have it backwards in that they're like, they feel they need to make this atlas first, and then they want to tell everybody about it because obviously you've put all this effort into doing it. And you know what, that nobody wants to sit there and just hear about geography of your world building
Unless you've actually successfully made characters and
exactly
and a plot that people have pulled through a story. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly that you got it right on the nose. You got to first get people interested into the world, because it's not the world that makes your story interesting, it's the characters that make it interesting.
Yep, absolutely. They need a place to function. They need something to do. And that takes villains. It takes that hero's journey. It takes some kind of what is it? McGuffin. What's that term?
A MacGuffin.
McGuffin, yeah.
McMuffins are tasty. MacGuffins make the plot go.
Well, I would do a lot for McMuffin, depending how hungry I am.
The story could be about the quest for a
it could be. I mean, I'm totally with you. I just I appreciate coming up with the ideas as I need them, as opposed to wasting a lot of time trying to find the ideas.
I mean, it kind of gets into the thing about, are you a plotter or are you a pantser, and I think the truth is that most people are probably somewhere in the middle, because it's a spectrum. I find that I know personally that for me, if I sit down and I start like heavy duty outlining and plotting, that gets into the world building dungeon, and I could do that forever and not actually write. So I kind of force myself to make fairly minimal notes, and then like I sit down and I start to write it. And then if I need to clarify things, if an idea comes to me as I'm writing, I'll stop and I'll do a little bit of research, and then I'll slap down some more word count on there, and so on and so forth.
Because it's not done. You know that you're going to go back, and you're going to work on it, and you're going to read it tens and 20s of time before you even get to the point where you're letting somebody else read it. So if you need to fix something, if you need to go back and edit, you're going to have that opportunity.
Yep. Particularly in this day and age. Yeah, exactly. Particularly in this day and age where a lot of fantasy writers come from a role-playing background, and you're used to getting, game materials that cover every little bit of aspect about a world, and that's important when you're running a game, because and I still game, and like I'll game master things, and it's totally true that like if you sit down there and like if you have a group of independently minded players and there's a mountain, and your adventure pretty much takes place by a lake at the bottom of the mountain, they're going to want to go to the top of the mountain, they're going to want to go around the mountain, and everywhere, and like you're going to have to either sit there and improvise and make it really awkward, or you have to know what's beyond the next mountain, because they're going to
inevitably, and the ground opens up and you fall underneath the mountain and you find yourself in a lake. No.
And then you flip the table over, total party kill. Yeah. So, but that's a role-playing game where it's open format. For the most part, when you're writing your characters, they're going to go where you envision them to go, and the reader might wonder what's over the mountain, but your story is going along this particular path. So then again, it's like a set. It's like so it doesn't matter what every little town is named or what their economy is or whatnot. A general idea is generally all is particularly what you need. You can put the detail, like there could be a house, like a single little house, and getting into the details of what that house is like is far more important than the entire kingdom if the story takes place in that house, or mostly
if it's needed. Yeah,
exactly. So people will sit down and they will kill themselves doing hundreds and hundreds of hours of world building and not get to it. Because my problem is that I did for 20 years, I did tons of world building and idea thinking and thinking of stories in my head. And then in 2013, when I said, you know what, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to actually write, I had no fucking idea how to write a story that was good in any way.
So what'd you do?
I started writing, because you learn by doing. You learn by writing. And that was my big turning point. I said, you know what, my friend had a blog and was putting stuff on that. I said, well, I've never really been too shy about to get out there and put my stuff up on a blog. And so I started writing stuff, and I'm sure it wasn't super great. And I put it up there anyways, and I made a goal to say, okay, I'm gonna update this, and I'm gonna keep going with this. And then and I wasn't really getting much feedback, and that's what brought me to Reddit and fantasy writers. Initially, I started looking at Reddit as a way to advertise spam my blog, to get people to check out my stories on.
Not what Reddit's about.
Not what it was about at all. And I learned that pretty quick, pretty passively too. I really didn't have to have the hammer put down on me. But I did, in that initial search, find the R Fantasy Writers subreddit. And so I saw people doing critiques, and I started reading the critiques. And I never really put a ton of critiques up on there in the early days. But
you mean requests for them?
Yeah, I never put in like a bunch in there to do requests for critique. I did do a little bit of critiquing and put some stuff up on there, but very rapidly I met other folks on Reddit, and we got talking off of Reddit, and they have become my critique partners. And I also had some other friends that I was exchanging my writing to do beta reading and critiquing on them, and that expanded with the new people that I met. And by participating particularly in the challenges, the writing challenges that were on the subreddit.
I love them. I love them so much. Every time I see that word challenge, it's like, yes.
The writing
Accepted.
Prompts. Yes. Those writing prompts and challenges were incredibly useful to me. I've in response to those challenges, I created a bunch of short stories that I really worked really hard on to polish and put together. And even ones that maybe I didn't even get up there in time to do that the short story method worked so much better. And before that, I had the idea that I was going to work on, like, I have very long stories that I wanted to put into novel format. And the problem is that when you want to write a novel, it's like a marathon. You have to have a certain level of endurance.
It's the same metaphor I use. Yep,
yeah,
absolutely.
And also the thing that can work against you is that you're writing so much verbiage and word count on there that it becomes really hard to critique. I mean, I'm right now I'm working on my first novel. I've got the manuscript done on it, and it's overall in a second draft, and I got a bunch more people that are of critiquing partners and beta readers that are gonna take a look at it before I'm anywhere close to done. But it's a huge undertaking, whereas the short stories, you can go through multiple drafts and you can pass them around, and not only that, they give you a sense of accomplished, that you finished something that you can be proud about, and people can read these short stories, and it's like, oh, you write? Yeah, here's a short story. It's not even as long as like a chapter in a book. Here, give it a look. And so like you can and you can share that on your blog, and just as a one shot that people can enjoy. And then you get into, from there, my short stories grew into novelettes and novellas, and it kind of builds up your endurance and your strength. So it's so good. I'm a big fan of Ray Bradbury, and before I kind of like retro engineered some of his advice that he had for new writers, and one of those was to write a whole bunch of short stories, for all of the reasons that I've already been going on, that you can crank them out and you can share them and you can polish them like you would with a longer work, but in a much shorter time. And they build up a portfolio. And back in Bradbury's day, you could readily sell short stories, and
unfortunately, that's something that's gone by the wayside. It's not possible anymore.
Yeah, I mean, there are still publications that will accept, but it's.
Are you reading them? Exactly. I submit stuff to a short story collection. It's like, I don't even know who these people are. I've never heard of this magazine. I might as well be sending it out to a black hole. I no clue.
Yeah. The idea of like short story fiction. I mean, like there's only a couple print ones that I think that are even still around. I think maybe the magazine of fantasy, science fiction and fantasy might still be around. Maybe
The tour
Asimov.
does something occasionally too. There's a
Yeah.
few, but yeah, and they're the big guys too. I mean, they're the guys that you'd go specifically to into the bookstore and buy
Yeah.
because you know of them.
And it's too bad because the short story is a wonderful format, and
Oh yeah,
we saw a lot of great authors in the 20th century come through that grindhouse of writing short stories for the fiction magazines. I mean, like HP and Robert E. Howard that we were speaking of earlier.
hmm
They all made a living that
yes,
way, you
a
know.
good living.
Yeah,
Kurt
and
Vonnegut.
Howard.
I mean, these guys
Yeah.
made their nest egg basically off that. You know, I'm of the argument that if you know how to write flash fiction, then you know how to write short stories. If you know how to write a short story, then you can write a novella, and if you can write a novella, you can write a novel. They all go hand in hand.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? They can't stand. You cannot write a novel without knowing the story structure of a short story because a short story is your chapter.
Exactly.
You have to have a beginning, middle, and end.
Yep, absolutely. You're totally on the money. I compare it to doing a marathon. You know, when people like, now that I'm a moderator on our fantasy writers, it's we get a lot of new folks that come in. Probably really young. I think probably our demographic is, if we balanced all the people who visit the sub, we probably find that most of them are still in high school or in college. So that kind of gives us an age range there. And like they come in and it's like, oh, I have this idea for something that's like a Song of Fire and Ice. And they're gonna like craft this, and they try to write. It's like, well, I have this idea. I haven't really written anything before, but I'm gonna like write this 200,000 word or 300,000 word fantasy epic. You know, it's gonna be like a trilogy and all this stuff. And I'm like, well, have you ever written any short stories? No, I've never really written anything before. I go, let me phrase it to you this way. If you got out of bed one day and you said, I am going to run a marathon. I'm going to run the Boston Marathon today. It's
6 minute
Patriot.
miles,
Yeah.
26 of them.
Yep. I'm gonna go, and I'm gonna go right. It's Patriots Day. I'm gonna go right down and I'm gonna run the Boston Marathon today. And you've never run in your life. You've haven't trained yourself or your body. You don't have any idea. There are two possibilities that are going to work out here. Number one, you're going to find out you have a superpower and you can run this marathon and it's awesome. The second and far more likely thing that's going to happen is that you are going to possibly die.
Well, I've not met many people with superpowers. It's a sad fact of our reality. There aren't many people out there with superpowers.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like you might have some phenomenal talent and be able to run, but the chances against it are pretty high. More likely, you're gonna fall completely on your face, exhausted.
You're never going to want to run again.
Yeah,
And that's the sad part.
And now just imagine that you, instead of running a marathon, you say, I'm going to write a 300,000
You're going to run 3 of them at the same time. You're going to do an ultra marathon. You're going to do 100 miles.
Yeah. And so I don't like to look at people and say, you're fooling yourself. I'm saying what you need to do is, if you want to really do this, you need to work at it. You need to train yourself. And like all of the failures that I had, when I wanted to say I'd have these long ideas, I would get focused in on like these really long stories, and I wouldn't have the stamina to hold through with them, and eventually I'd get frustrated and things would drop, and I would go back to more world building, because that I could do for a really long time.
Would you recommend that to a new writer? If you, let's say you got into a conversation with one of these young kids that are doing the critiques on fantasy writing, and they wanted to write the epic 3-volume J.R.R. Martin fantasy series, would you tell them to sit down and start doing what you did as a kid? Or when you were coming up, would you say, why don't you try to world build? Why don't you tell me a little bit about politics? Why don't you get onto that world building subreddit and do some of the work there and see what this is that you're trying to build?
If I would ask them, are they interested in building the world, or are they interested in making a book? Like, do you want to make a book to sell a story that other people are going to read and enjoy? Or are you just really interested in building the world for your own personal satisfaction? Neither of these things are better than the other. but first you need to, because if you're going to write and you're going to try to sell a book and have other people to read it and enjoy it, and you get some feeling out of that, you have to be for that 100%. It's not about building the world at 100%. Tolkien was fortunate, and he came at the right time in history where nobody had really done what he had accomplished.
Tell you the truth, though, I don't even think he was doing that. I think that he had characters. I think he had characters, and he decided, okay, damn, this character needs to do this thing, and I need to build up a scaffolding necessary for this guy to do the thing that I want him to do.
I think that there may have been a little bit of that, but primarily from everything I've read about the professor, he just built these stories for his own enjoyment, and then decided to kind of put them in there. Of course, I'm sure that like every author, he wanted his books to be successful, and he ended up doing that. But I think that like for the most part, the world building was number one, and the story building was number two. That's not
didn't the Hobbit come out way before the trilogy?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, you had this one small children's story. It's what, 300, 400 pages. I read it a long time ago, but it's a standalone. You have some characters in a world, and it's a great world. And then he takes that world, he goes, I want to make an epic with the exact same world that he wrote that children's novel, and he ends up writing thousands of pages worth of the probably best fantasy story in the 20th century.
Well,
as a writer, you have to recognize that he knew the world that he was in. He knew the characters that he was working with. He was already starting to flesh those out, and he needed a scaffolding to get them to where he was going. So I don't think he necessarily did, let's world build and then fit the characters into this. I think he had characters.
Well, I think he imagined characters because he was creating things for himself, and the man loved the worlds that he created, and the mythology that he created. He just absolutely loved it. To create the tremendous amount of material that he did, that love is obviously apparent. I'm just saying that I don't think that Tolkien set out and said, I'm going to create a book that people are going to like. And then he like pulled in.
But he already did it, though. He already did that with The Hobbit. He already made a book that people love.
They
Hobbit, loved that book.
The Hobbit was, I think, fairly popular. I'd have to brush up on the Hobbit, but I know that like the Hobbit's success pales in compared to what he did with the Lord of the Rings. I think that the Hobbit got a big afterwards push. Again, I'd have to sit down and do more research on it. But Tolkien was not like, the Hobbit had not become like an enormous splash. I mean, there is I think that the Hobbit came out in 1936, I think is when the Hobbit was published. I might be wrong. And the Fellowship of the Ring came out, I believe, in 1958.
Yeah, it didn't finish until the 70s, right?
Oh, no. The three books came out they were out by 1960s. And then they sat around for about 10 years before they began getting, they got really popular about 10 years after they were released. It was only like at the very end of Tolkien's life that he started getting a lot of recognition for his work.
Interesting.
The 1960s counterculture movement in the United States began to latch on to the Lord of the Rings books, and then everything exploded for the Lord of the Rings. You had Led Zeppelin like coming up with like songs that are alluding to things in the Lord of the Rings, and all this other stuff, and that was all in the late 60s, early 70s that all took off.
Thinking about it, I actually do think that you're right, though. I think he did do a lot of world building when he was writing the trilogy because he had writer's block. He was not able to function to get the stuff that he wanted out of his small little, tool, and he just created and created and created and created, and eventually it popped. I remember him writing up to the part where he brought them the hobbits to the tree. I can't remember. He met the brown wizard for the first time. I think that's what I'm talking about. Am I talking about the right character?
Are you talking about the Lord of the Rings?
Yes.
I think you're thinking of Tom Bombadil.
I am speaking of him. So when they got to that part of the book, he said he got to that part and he could not push past it.
Yep.
for years and years and years. I mean, he would just rewrite that section over and over and over again.
Yep.
And he popped.
Yep.
And he got the rest of the trilogy. But
he was working on these stories when he was a young man. I mean, even he was writing the beginnings of his mythos back when he was like still going through college and before he left to fight in the First World War. You know, and you know, when he first got married, and he wrote stories of love, you know, that were inspired by his young wife at the time. So which, if you ever do any reading on his biography, it's kind of a very fascinating story about how they even ended up together. You know, it's quite inspiring. It says a lot about, you know, having a significant other that's supportive of you. But yeah, I mean, that was in 1916, and The Hobbit didn't come out until 20 years later, and it had a modest success, but it was more as the foundation of the Lord of the Rings that I think that the Hobbit really began to take off, you know, and that was after the Lord of the Rings was published, which was another 20 years almost after that. And I mean, and the guy was also busy. I mean, he was a professor, you know, so he had a lot, and he was hanging out with fantastic guys like C.S. Lewis.
C.S. Lewis, yep.
And they had a pipe smoking club, you know, it's like, hey, let's get together and smoke some pipes. So, you know, and he was, and Tolkien had a lot of influence on getting him to write and create the Narnia stories and other things.
That's my favorite books as a kid.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do believe that Tolkien was everything that I can read about the man and that I know of him. He created the Lord of the Rings for himself. He loved it, and to me, that's the way to do it, because Bradbury again has this great saying, and I love this saying. It's like, write what you love and love what you write. And it is a truism in that, you know, writing is hard. If you don't love what you're doing and love what you're creating, you're never going to stick with it, because it's hard. Do
you still love your current novel?
Oh yes.
Do you still do?
Yes, I still do.
Oh man, I hate my characters now. I couldn't stand it. The novel that I have on Amazon right now, I could wait to be done with that thing. I was like, I hate all of you. I blew up that world like forest, like nuclear explosion. Oh damn it! I delete.
Well, it's your sentiment is absolutely probably more common than what mine is. I've heard a lot of authors that have that sentiment, and I'll be honest, I haven't finished working on the novel. But if I had reached a point of hating it and not wanting to do anything with it, I would just stop. You know, that's kind of the thing that happens. People start working and it becomes hard, and you start have to make choices between like friends or writing, or you know, am I going to play video games tonight, or am I going to work on the novel again? Am I going to go watch?
I haven't played video games in so long.
Yeah, me neither. I mean, like that used to be like a really big thing for me, but that I gave it up. I used to go and watch a ton of movies all the time. I had
given that up too.
I used to go. I had a group of friends that I would get together. We'd play Pathfinder once a month, and we'd get together another night, and we just play general games and hang out. I wasn't able to keep going on my book. You know, I'm like, this is going to take me 10 years to do if I keep doing this up. So I said, I'm sorry, guys. At least for a little bit, I got to dial it back. You know, I've lost friends over that. You know, because you know they're like, they don't really support me, you know, in for what I believe in my writing and finishing my book. And, you know, people who aren't going to support me, well, if you're not going to support me, I'm not going to expend the effort on you to keep going. So I'm going to focus in on the things that are important to me and on the people who believe, you know, and support me in what I'm going to do. So I've lost friends over that. I don't shed any tears over it. You know, and that's the sacrifice that you have to be willing to do. Now, if you're not willing to do that, you know, if you're not willing to do that, you're not going to be willing to continue with the book.
Yeah, and like you said, it is a marathon. You have to concentrate on what you're doing. You have to concentrate on that step, the next one, and the next one, and the 26 miles later.
Exactly.
And if you don't, if you get distracted, you're just going to stop at the next water break and go back to the hotel or whatever.
and you got to love it. I mean, because that's what keeps you going. But you also need to, I think a lot of people make the mistake is that I'm going to write a book that's going to be successful. And so instead of writing a book that they, or even just telling a story that they think is going to be something that they want to write, they're writing for other people. Like, oh, vampires are vampire love stories are where it's at right now. That's the trend. So I'm going to write a vampire love story. And
that's Wattpad. Have you ever been on that website?
I do have an account on there. I'm afraid I don't do too much with it.
There's no point to it unless you write the vampire stuff that's real popular. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I understand you really do have to be in the mindset of, instead of writing the successful story, you have to be successfully writing stories.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to be successful in writing, not writing successful fiction.
Yeah, because if you fake it, people are gonna know that you're faking it. If you don't embrace it wholeheartedly and say, this is something that gets me excited and is totally freaking cool, and I can't wait to work some more on this story. If you don't have that kind of enthusiasm, you're just going to be going through the motions. And if you're not enthusiastic about it, if you don't love it, if you're not shedding tears or getting afraid when you're writing the story and the heavy parts of the story, then the reader doesn't have a chance to feel that emotion.
Now let's talk about the reader for a minute. And
Sure.
in a world where we have a slush pile that is millions of volumes thick, nobody's pilfering through it looking for the cream of the crop. What is your plan when can I tell the name of your novel?
Vivian's Last Cigarette? Yeah, sure.
Vivian's Last Cigarette. What are we going to do when Vivian's Last Cigarette's finished and you're ready to get it out there in the world, give birth to it?
Well, I expect people to line up around the block to buy it.
How is that going to happen? Tell me your plan.
My plan.
Lay down your marketing scheme for me, because I'm gonna take some real vicious notes here.
My marketing. See, you are aware that I have not published anything yet, and my marketing plan. Okay, you're putting me on the spot here. Well, my plan is to.
Well, as far as theorize what you think. Let's talk about Stephanie Myers. Let's talk about what's the guy's name from The Martian fame, The Egg. Let's talk about these guys and how they've managed to capture millions and millions of eyes and the imaginations of filmmakers, and lots of other people don't get to that point. But there are lots of us out there. Lots of people want to write novels. Lots of people do. How do you rise to the crop? How do you rise to the top?
Well, I think that first you have to be passionate about it. I think there's probably a measure of fate involved in there, and just the whims of the way the world is going at the time. Sometimes, like for example, let's take a popular punching bag. Let's say Twilight. I think that Twilight is not great fiction by any means. However, it's got a lot of themes in there that a large majority of people can resonate with.
Classic themes.
It's classic themes. It's got stuff in there that people can latch onto. It's got a love story. There's some conflict. The way that it is written is very much like a lot of your run-of-the-mill romances are written, where the lead female character is like a pair of pants that you can slide on. For a lot of women, and then just kind of insert themselves into the role to imagine themselves into the story. Because Bella, I think is her name, was very bland. So she kind of goes through all of that in there. So, but that's a successful tactic because with casual readers, the casual reader wants to read something that is engrossing and they can see themselves in the role, and it's very straightforward. So there were combinations of elements, even though it doesn't have any, it's not nearly as creative as, say, Interview with a Vampire, and other vampire books has probably far exceeded what it was. And certainly I didn't get anything out of it. My wife didn't get anything out of it. We did get a good laugh out of the first movie, but but I'm getting off topic here, and I don't want to be. I'm not going to besmirch the series is extremely successful, and it was because it resonated with a large group of people who were more than willing to sit down and enjoy it. But if it had
Well,
come
that's my
out,
question though,
yeah,
is how did it resonate? How did not just how does it resonate? Because I mean, we could talk about story structure and characters and identifying with readers and whatnot all day long. What it did though was rise to the top.
hmm
It became a book that people were able to find and read and buy and give Stephanie Myers millions of dollars. How did that happen? And how do you hope to get Vivian's last cigarette to that point? Or is there, I mean, we said maybe you hit the nail on the head. Maybe it is just luck.
I don't think it's all luck. I think that she made choices in creating the novel, consciously or subconsciously, which created a format that people latched onto and that they really liked. And then it fell into the hands of a publisher that felt that that this could be a really successful thing, and the publisher got behind it, and there was marketing that was involved in there. Um, and so therefore it got into the conscious, and kind of like it snowball or a roller coaster, it began to build up momentum, and then came out the additional books and sequels on that, and having a movie tie-in most certainly doesn't hurt. So there were a whole combination of things, but in a different kind of environment, would it have, I mean, like if let's say that Twilight was released, say in the 1970s, without a lot of the other built supernatural, paranormal romance uh, genres that it built upon, would it have been the big success that it is today? I give a big shrug. I'm not quite sure, but my suspicion is that it probably would have faltered and been more at best a more quiet success, like Interview with the Vampire was. And Interview with the Vampire was something with Anne Rice that those books kind of built up over time as the additional ones in the series were released, and she became more of a name.
It's very interesting. I mean, we're talking about Stephanie Myers here, and I just went to the
Yeah,
Wikipedia page, and if you want to find out where she came from, good luck. It's like she was just hatched as an award-winning author that made millions of dollars. There's nothing about her career prior to that, about her
yeah,
struggles writing short fiction, about anything in terms of prior to this.
yep,
It's
yep.
like she was just hatched. I mean, where did she come from? Is she a real person? I mean, it's really hard to put your finger on it.
It
I mean,
seems to she comes across as someone who likes to have her privacy, so that might be part of it. Um,
she wasn't on Reddit. She wasn't on Wattpad, right? She
yep,
wasn't blogging extensively. She just appeared.
yep. And
And
I think that the book just hit a nerve, a spot, that people really wanted to latch onto, and it became.
wasn't she writing online though?
You know what? I haven't done any thorough research on her. I'm not. I didn't really care for the series, so I
Either
don't
I, yeah. I mean,
know.
this is the first time really I've ever actually thought about where did this woman put her stuff out at, and I'm not finding it.
But I mean, if we want to talk
So
about
maybe
like
she's not.
it,
What?
it could be, there's songs that are one-hit wonders. There are authors that are one-hit wonders too. And then you have authors that have like a very long and consistent success. Um, like Peter S. Beagle, he's most well known for The Last Unicorn.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful book. I love it. Love the book. But none of his other works have come close to reaching parity with The Last Unicorn. um you know it could be that she wrote this for a myriad number of reasons. I think that she probably liked what she was writing, and she just hit all those right notes. I don't really believe in luck, so I'm reluctant to say that it's all just luck. I know that if, say, we want to take another example of fantastic success like J.K. Rowling, now she worked long and hard and had lots of rejections. And she had a lot of difficulties in her life leading up to
Mm-hmm.
the first Harry Potter book, and then that was, the how that got picked up and is well documented. That it took like somebody's kid taking a read, and it was a little similar to The Hobbit, because when Tolkien was trying to get The Hobbit out there, Eventually it was given, one of the publishers didn't want to read what he felt was a kid's book. And he gave it to, I believe, their young son or daughter that was around 10 or 11 years old. And he asked them if they liked it. And they said, yes, it wasn't perfect, but it was a very good book. And of course they said it in a much more British way than I possibly could. But the publisher thought, well, my kid liked it well enough, so I'll give the guy a chance, and they published it. And sometimes that's the way that it goes for things.
Let
I
me
don't.
ask you this:
Mhm.
you finish Vivian's Last Cigarette.
Yep.
Are you going to try and publish traditionally?
No.
You're going to
Uh,
be an indie.
I'm gonna self-publish, indie publish, however you want to call it. I'm gonna set up the ethereal press, and try to get that out there on my own. And there's a number of reasons for that. One, this is a very different story. It's a lot of the market with fantasy publishing right now, just like movie producers, book publishers, don't. They're running a business, and their business is to make money. And when you're dealing in the field of entertainment, what they want to stick with is what is tried and true. And that's why we find the same types of stories done over and over again. Same reason why we look at, our movies and we find that half of them are remakes or sequels or prequels, because they want to stick with something that has been a proven moneymaker, because they really don't want to take big risks. That's the big difference between cinema now and, say, cinema in the 1980s, at least the early up to the mid 80s. And books have kind of picked up on the same trend because big publishers, they're taking on a lot of risk to advertise a book and put everything out.
Hmm.
And I really believe that Vivian's is quite a different idea. I think that I could be trying to pitch this book for a very long time. I mean, what's your pitch? Okay, it's kind of a urban fantasy set in 1989 about a couple of 17-year-olds who happen to be orcs, and they're into D&D and punk rock. And I'm going to get a door slammed in my face.
No, I like that. That's interesting. In fact, I think I remember you saying something about how Vivian's a half orc, right?
No, in the context of the story. There's a thing called The Change, which starts in 1986, and the story itself is set in 1989. And with the change, a number of um, people and animals begin to take on these kind of characteristics of fantasy type creatures and races. So you have people who become ill, and then they go through a metamorphosis, and they end up looking like a troll or a dwarf or an elf or an orc. And you know, and then you have animals that take on fantastic uh, attributes as well. And nobody knows why this is happening or even how. So scientists and other than that, it's pretty much the world it's kind of got an aspect of alternate history, because things obviously, are progressing a bit differently in this world. But a lot of people are really afraid of the changelings, which is what they call the people and animals that have begun to change, and then have to live with this. And they get called things like elves or dwarves or whatnot, and those things have been pulled from popular culture. They're just colloquial names. It's like, oh, Bill got sick and he got dwarfed, which means that he's now like 5-something feet tall and really stout, with a propensity of body hair. So like, so like they say the guy's, so he's now like a dwarf, but then the people who are the scarier looking type things, they call like the little scrawny ones goblins. They call the bigger, stronger one orcs, the really, really big giant ones they call trolls. And these are kind of like put downs, and names, and people are afraid. And Vivian, when she starts changing, she's had a really rough time of things, because she wasn't even 16, and she gets sick one day, and she goes to the hospital, and within a few weeks, like, she's ashen green and got tusks and all this other stuff. And the other and the changelings are a minority, in that only about 1 out of 1,000 people by the time the story starts is a changeling. And so they're quite rare and odd, and they don't necessarily have a good lot. And the ones that are mean and ugly looking, like the orcs, have the worst lot of all.
Hmm.
So it's kind of that's basically the setup. So the she's just an orc. She's not a half anything. So in fact, in the stories, the different, once they go through the change, they're effectively a different species. There's no half breeds in this setting. So, but not that they've been around long enough for that really to become a thing. They're pretty rare, so they usually, just meeting up with another orc is kind of a thing, which is exactly what happens in the story. So
very not, I hate when somebody says this, but reminiscent of Terry Brooks and his sort of Shannara type of alternate.
A little bit. I never really got into those books. I had a friend that was really into them, but I don't really know. I know that he's kind of got like a series of races, and he tried to like switch things up a little bit. Like I remember my friend going off about how the dwarves don't like being underground. That was like a characteristics in those books, if I'm remembering things correctly. But I never got into that particular series. So
it's good stuff. So what are you gonna do tomorrow? You finish it.
Tomorrow I finish it.
What's gonna be your first step?
T-shirts.
Really?
I've I as I mentioned earlier, when I was in high school, I did a lot of work in visual arts, and that's a skill that's kind of stuck around with me. And my wife has a degree in visual design, and we've been working on just for fun. You know, when I get tired on the writing, I'll work on some bit of promo, and I've come up with a couple of T-shirts ideas. I'm being facetious, just that's not the crux of my marketing plan. But you
never know. That might be the thing that happens, though. It might pop.
you know what? Hey, you know,
people love T-shirts.
Just try it. I mean, like, there's a lot of pop cultural references in Vivian's, but as far as like my marketing goes, I've got a blog. I know a lot of folks. I can get on Reddit and stuff, but I don't want to put the marketing before finishing up the book. But insofar as like getting it out there, I think the first thing is that I need to have a quality book. Mm-hmm. I think that the way I function, I'm always working.
Well, who's going to tell you it's quality?
You know,
that's like the most esoteric question you could possibly ask yourself is, are you going to trust yourself? Are you going to trust your wife? Or are you just going to go ahead and leap of faith, which is the only way, honestly, in my opinion.
You have to have some faith in yourself, or you wouldn't get that far in the first place.
You wouldn't be on your second draft, period. Yeah, exactly. You need to have faith in yourself.
I wouldn't be working on parts of it that are in a sixth draft right now. I have a whole collection of critique partners of very varying tastes on right now. And right now I'm working with a critique partner, and she's upfront and saying that this isn't her cup of tea. It isn't written in a point of view that she would like, and it's not something that she would have picked up and kept reading. Mm-hmm. However, and she found some severe problems in the opening of the book in her point, and those echoed, what the other readers were talking about. Now, there does reach a point where revision where you can just keep cycling, just like world building, and doing that forever. But exactly. I think that if I can put this, I have lined up 10 different individuals of widely varying backgrounds. I'm going to be making at least 11 different drafts of this novel.
That's a lot, man.
That I believe in it, and this is I'm just taking the process that I do with my short stories to get those refined and cleaned. I mean, I don't have I don't have money to afford like a super big name editor to go through this and go for it. I don't have the money to contract with an agent and to have them do this. And the subject matter of the book is not traditional. It's not what I believe publishers are looking for, where they're trying to sell it. But I think
I could see that being traditionally published. I could see that being popular in terms of independent too. Mm-hmm. My main question for you though is, you finished Vivian's, you put the T-shirts out. Do you have something else lined up, or are you just going to write a second, Vivian's second to last cigarette?
Yeah, I got
Vivian's
so much
first day without cigarettes.
I got so many ideas that I want to write and put out there.
Have you started any of them?
Yeah, I got a whole bunch on the back burner. I got Prince of Stars. Yeah, I got the thing that'll sell the first book will be the second book. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the third book's going to sell the second one. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Brilliant.
I've got the Brian's Mark. I've got a collection of short stories set in Burris, which is going to be over 100,000 words long, where it's all put together. Short story collection. I was actually working on that, and I started writing the short story that became Vivian's as a break from the short story collection. I've got, a thing with at least 7 or 8 different short stories and novelettes, novellas that are going into that'll be coming out after that. Vastly different than what I'm doing with Vivian's. That's all much more traditional type fantasy in that collection. I've got the Prince of Stars, which is inspired by a whole bunch of science fantasy type things that I grew up with watching when I was a kid, from Star Wars to Battlestar Galactica, to the Macross, Robotech animes, stuff like that. And that currently is in a feature. I've got Allied Axis. I've got. I'm sorry, I'm running out of spit here. I've got.
Well, I've been talking for about an hour and a half. I mean,
Yeah.
It's been a nice conversation in terms of information.
Yep, I've got a story that's an alternate history. It was just really weird, where I have a World War II story featuring famous historical women that are modernized into like a 1930s, where Napoleon has joined the Axis powers, and it's all taking place. And it's called Allied Section Alpha, where I have Joan of Arc as Captain Joan of Arc, with kind of like this 1930s kind of version of the Avengers. But it's like Madame Curie, and Amelia Earhart is like the ace pilot, and all of that stuff. And I was having tremendous fun with that story, and I got onto some other projects.
Yeah.
So, and again, it's all like, I'm writing stuff that I think is cool and is fun. And what put Vivs over that is that it hit me because it flashed back to points of my youth that were very emotional and had a point to me, because the initial concept for Vivian's, in 1989, the game Shadowrun came out. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So Shadowrun came out in 1989, and I bought that with my lawn mowing money. And the setting of that really got me thinking about the mixing of genres and the idea of fantasy races and whatnot. And so I started coming up with this idea where, well, what if something like in Shadowrun happened with like a return of these kind of beings and races, but it happened in a kind of a contemporary setting instead. And that was an idea that has hung around me, and I made notes of it at the time. And when I was making these notes, there was much more of like an action adventure kind of campaign setting, kind of an idea. And then last year, we were coming up with ideas on the Fantasy Writers Group, and I said, hey, write a fantasy story in the 1980s. And so I got thinking, well, hey, that popped right back into my head. And that process, that process, and so I looked at it as a 42-year-old man looking back at the 15-year-old that I was, going through those things in 1989, and I basically wrote the story that I had in no way the skills and knowledge to do. But it's also a story about that kid and what he was going through, and that's where the coming of age aspect of the story comes from. So that's my contribution as the man that boy had become. That it became.
Let me ask you one last question about
Sure.
Vivian. Does Michael Keaton's Batman still get released in the summer of 1989?
Oh, that's actually something I've thought about a lot. Yes, is the question. They actually reference the movie, and Gronk, the other orc in the story, has the soundtrack on tape. And it actually,
Gronk, I have stolen your name, haven't I? I have stolen the character's name for you. That's where I got that name from, I think.
Vivin Gronk. His actual name is Jules or Julian. That's a nickname. The Gronk is actually the name of his D&D character, who was a half orc, to bring that subject back. But
That's so interesting. I mean, you're so prolific on fantasy writing that I've stolen in the name of one of your characters without even realizing I've done it. Man,
well,
I gotta tell you, this has been a fantastic conversation. I've really, really enjoyed it. And you know, you're a cool guy, and other people probably realize this as well. They want to read what you produced, and I'm looking forward for you to get the thing out there, get Ethereal Press up and running, and actually produce some of these works so we can download it on our phones.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
you guys are doing such a great job with fantasy writing as well. I mean, I don't know what happened as far as last week or the week before, whatever post said negative things about critiques. I think something needs to be done there, but I don't know what it is. I love the challenges. I really do. I think they're fantastic. They're really imagination influencing, and
Mm-hmm.
they're really. I look forward to it every month. Are you going to submit something this month?
Not this month. I the last about 6 months have been pretty. I had a couple really short ones that I put in there, but now I'm knee deep in editing and writing some additional chapters for Viv's. So I'm taking myself out on this one. I really want to see if I can get the book ready to go before the end of the summer.
Wow,
so I'm
okay.
working really hard towards that end. Will I make it? I don't know, but
I wish you all the luck in the world.
I want to get that book out there for you to read and for everybody else to check out. I'm excited because I think that it'll speak to a lot of people in a lot of different ways, and it's not your typical epic fantasy, but it's got a lot of heart, and it's got some great characters in there, which we both were talking.
I can tell you've got a lot of heart too, man. Do you want to mention anything else before we wrap it up?
Write what you love and love what you write.
Absolutely. Totally agree.
That's your mantra whenever, if you don't write for other people, write what you think is cool. If you think writing a thing about dinosaurs that shoot lasers with crystalline symbiotes that live on their backs is like, and they have a little kid that is their human familiar. If you think
so I have a feeling you've started writing this already.
Oh, sure, why not? Yeah, if you think that's the coolest thing, you got to do it with all your heart and believe.
There you go.
Don't,
that's the best advice in the world. Do it with all your heart.
Just put it out there. Love it, because you know what, the odds are stacked against you that you might not be J.K. Rowling, the next J.K. Rowling. But if you write a book that you love with all your heart, at the very least, you can say you're proud that I made this and I love this and I think it's great. But you know what?
You finished the marathon.
You finished the marathon, and so few people can do that and do it well. I mean, in this day and age, you can churn out a novel like National Writing Month novel, do your 50,000 words, and then put it in a drawer and never do anything. But to sit there and to polish it and to make it a true piece of representative art that is dear to your heart is a chore. And if you love it, you can do it. And if you put that love into the book and you show it to other people, then other people are going to like it too. And that's the thing that makes me go back to writing the stories over and over, to make my stories live in somebody else's heart and mind and somebody else's soul. That's the most I can tell you. I might not have anything published, but I have worked with other authors. Not to make your interview too long, but I'll just end on this. I worked with Paul Mathis, who's working on a book called Orc Song, which he's in his final edits on, and he's working to get that out. And the guy's a musician, and I wrote a story called The Brine's Mark. And I had a little contest. You can look this through if you go to Fantasy Writers and go through, we had a contest for write a sea shanty. And the guy didn't just do the lyrics, he actually produced a whole song. And he produced the song based off of my story, The Brine's Mark. And he made a song about a villainous character in there called the Holloman. And it was so fantastic of a feeling to see that you put your heart and your effort into a story, and then somebody else reads it, and then they reinterpret it, and then that story is alive in them, and then he creates this song that totally embodies the characters in a way that you never could have expressed. There was no grander feeling in the world that when I saw that, and that was just a small taste, and I said, you know what? This is so rewarding. I got to go with this. this is what I want to do with my life. And that right there is the reward above all other monetary considerations. It's not about the bucks. You do it because you love, what you're doing. Is it great to make a living doing what you love? Yeah, but you gotta if you live for that moment of your story living in another person and being truly a living thing that's passed from you and it lives beyond you and somebody else, that's the most beautiful thing to me as a creator, to see that happen. And that's the big reward. And
Yeah,
I'm going to
I
end on
agree.
that.
What was Orc Song, the author? What was his name?
I believe that is Paul Mathis.
What's his name on Reddit?
That's Sky. He spells it funny. It's like skyscraper, but it's spelled a little bit odd. He's checked in on the recent authors check-in on the group, so you can
I
find
know
him.
I've interacted with him before because Orc Song is definitely very, very familiar to me.
Yes, it sounds fantastic. He's got I think he's got a version that he'll let anybody take a look and give him notes on.
Okay.
I've been so busy with my own book that I've had to curtail looking at some other
Yeah.
folks' work. But
I can't read anybody else's stuff right now. I've got so many books I want to read, and
oh yeah, yeah.
I don't want to say, I'm going to read your book and then not read it. That would be heartbreaking.
Well, that gets to a point where you're creating so much content that you have to curtail. It's like you want to read. You have a huge stack of books. We love books. We love to read, and you have to curtail it because if you spend all your time reading, you won't finish your own work. It's the dilemma.
Exactly. And man. Anyway, I really, really appreciate you being my number 2 guest. This has been a great conversation. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen going forward as far as where they're going to live or how this is going to go. You could visit the link. It'll be on YouTube, the 100 minutes or whatever it's going to be. You could share it if you want, the conversation. But as far as podcasting, I'm not sure yet what's going to happen. I have like 6 or 7 interviews lined up. I want to mine some other writers on fantasy writing too. If you know of anybody that you think would be interested in having a conversation.
Sure. If anybody should come up and come to mind, I know some folks that I deal with, but I don't know how comfortable they might be, speaking. I don't have a problem with that, but others.
No, you've been great. I'm so happy. I'm so happy with how this worked out, and
I'm happy to be here.
And I look forward to interacting with you online, and maybe we could do this again.
Yeah, I'd love to. Just shoot me an email. I'd be happy to do a part 2.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll keep this going. Jason, thank you so much, man. You have a great Saturday.
You have a great weekend too, Brian. You take care.
And that's Jason Abbott. Thanks for listening. And remember, the podcast does come out twice a week on Tuesday and Thursday. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. My email address is me@brianyellow.com, or Twitter me at BRYAYellow. Don't forget to make comments if you have them. brianyellow.com. And that's it. Take care. Have a great week. And remember to keep writing.